that we have captured of cocaine in Colombia, most of them are going now to Europe.
Europe.
That's why we're calling the attention. And at the same time, sometime I said something that is very tough, but at the end is the real thing. A drug addict in the United States is a drug terrorist. Because he's sniffing cocaine in the United States, someone is killed in Colombia. Because of the money that we get from the US or for Europe, are buying arms in our country and killing Colombians. And they have killed the best journalists, the best lawyers, the best politicians, the best policemen, judges, members of the army. So you have to also have that conscience that the violence of this country right now is financed by drugs. And that's why at the end we're having violence in Colombia. So also we have to create conscience in the United States of what is happening in our country.
Stop. Everything, get everything ready. Get everything together. That was one. Has the world's highest kidnapping rate, a murder rate 10 times higher than the United States, an urban unemployment rate of 20%, insurrection, turmoil, violence, massacres. Do you ever open your eyes and say, no, I want to go back to sleep?
Look, Gerald, I think that since I think of being president of this country, we knew the problems that we have. And that's why we said we need to work. We knew what was going to be this job. And we fight, and I fight for this job, really, to try to get the country out of all these difficulties that you've said, drugs, violence, kidnapping, unemployment. And I've said that's what we have to do, and that's what I have to be really committed in to help this country. And that's what I've been doing in politics since I was a member of the City Council of Bogota. I think it was year 1976 for the first time I want to run, and I arrived to the city of Bogota City Council in 1982. And that's what I really have been committed in, helping the people, and now from the president, helping Colombia, taking the real image as we talked before. How can we change the perception of Colombia, the real image of our country outside, and get the support of the international community in this fight against this common enemy that we have, that it's narco-trafficking, that it's the one that is creating most of the problems in this country. Violence, kidnapping, and that's why we need the support of the international community in this fight.
Don't you ever lose your optimism?
No.
In the face of so many obstacles?
We know that sometimes it's very difficult because the things that you see, the problems that you have, but the only one that cannot lose the optimism is the president. And that's what I try to transmit to the people. Look, we know that we have problems, but 99.9% of this country, we are honest, hardworking people. And that's what we need to bring the people back optimism. And I think that's the worst problem I think that we had, if we could say problem, is pessimism in this country. We know that, as you said, we have an employment rate of 20%. Now the national unemployment rate is 14.6%. Still is very bad for us. But at the end we have, okay, at least bring the unemployment 5-6 points down. We had a big fiscal deficit, big economic emergency when I arrived to government, but now the country is back on track, and I think that we could see the future with optimism, but we need the help of the people. And that's why we're trying to get the people committed in that. We know that we have problems. We have started a peace process with insurgent groups, and now in the future, I think the future is going to be different of this country, but we need to unite all Colombians in trying to create and build this new country.
You know, I have never, now that I've spent this time here and I've visited here several times before over the years, I've never met a nicer people, more handsome people, a strong character, friendly, hospitable, but they deal with such crises. I mean, to think if the United States had the problem with kidnapping, for example, is it any wonder that so many Colombians are fleeing the country and moving to the United States and elsewhere?
Yes, I think that, Geraldo, two things. As you said, you know, Colombian people are so open, the hospitality of this country, the beautiful country we have, the richness of this country. But unfortunately, I think the worst cancer that hit us is narco-trafficking. And that's why so many times when I fly and I go to the United States or to Europe, it's amazing that people think that narco trafficking is good for Colombia. And that's the worst cancer for us. As I said before, violence in this country, financed by narco trafficking. Common delinquency, financed by narco trafficking. Insurgent groups, financed by narco trafficking. Paramilitaries, financed by narco trafficking. And sometimes people think, okay, for Colombia, that's a good business. That's the worst thing that happened to this country. I've been, for example, in the middle of Colombia. I went like 2 months ago to the south of Bolivar that was the base of one of the paramilitary groups. And I was talking to the peasants and they were growing coca. We fumigate, we eradicate coca, and now they don't have anything. We have to go there with alternative crops. But what impacted me was the poverty of these people. You said, okay, these guys are cultivating coca, and I haven't seen more poverty in this country than in this place. And sometimes the perception outside is they thought that the peasants of Colombia are full of money. The drug business, Geraldo, I think it's, now because of the oil prices, I think is the second largest business in the world. The figures that we have is like $500 billion a year. And that money is not in Colombia. Those $500 billion are not in the Colombian banks. I don't know if they're in the US or in the Europe, but that money is not in the country. And by the country, we are having more poverty and more difficulties, displacement in Colombia.
You have a situation where you have rioting among your own campesinos, your peasants, your farmers now because they don't want this fumigation. You've already stopped fumigating down south. Do you blame them? They say you're destroying their legitimate crops, their livelihood, you're causing health problems with this fumigation?
Look, for the first time, Gerald, the U.S. invest in social investment in this country. Of the $1.3 billion of the Plan Colombia, between 250 to $300 million, 20% of Plan Colombia's money is going to be for social investment, alternative development programs. What we have done is two things. First of all, identifying what I call the industrial crops. You know, cultivation of 100 or 200 or 300 hectares are not owned by peasants. Those are owned by big organizations, narco traffickers. Those ones, we are fumigating them. We're putting all the efforts with the police and the army in fumigating these large extensions of coca crops. The small crops, the 2-3 hectares that are owned by the peasants, for the first time, in the case, for example, of Putumayo, we have developed a program of manual eradication that we are giving money to the campesinos, eradicating manually the coca, and on the other hand, giving them money to have new alternative crops, legal crops. So I think that's something very important for this country, dividing the industrial crops from the family crops.
But isn't it a fact that fumigation will be impossible? You have environmental concerns, you have the rioting now from people who are, you know, would you want it sprayed on your lawn, this stuff? It comes with a warning from Monsanto.
That's right.
You know, don't let it touch your body, don't breathe it, don't let it get in your food. I mean, who would want that sprayed?
No, I agree with you. First of all, the first thing that we've studied is the environmental impact of the glyphosate that we're using. And that's a product that is used, 70% of that product in Colombia is used in legal crops. So that the first thing is protect our peasants and our army and our soldiers and our policemen, because they're there also in the fumigation. And that's why we propose the international community give us money that instead of fumigating, we could start programs as these of eradication, manual eradication programs. For example, in Putumayo, we have signed already, I think at the end of June, we will sign like 7,000 families, manual eradication programs, that it will benefit like 25,000 people. So that's one of the first experiments. And second is investment in infrastructure, investment in education, investing in social investment, avoiding these peasants to go to these illicit or illegal crops. Because that's another thing, that many times people ask, what is Colombia doing? The U.S., Geraldo, is going to give us $1.3 billion in 3 years. I invest $1 billion a year avoiding the drug to go to the streets of New York. And that's not fair. Because many of the peasants said to me, instead of avoiding the drug to go to the streets of the U.S., why don't you invest in us, in education, in sewage system, water supply, agriculture, alternative crops?
Good questions.
Yes, and that's a good question. That's why we're saying to the international community, this is the problem of the world, not the problem only of Colombia. Help us.
I've seen some recent statistics that indicate for every acre you eradicate, another acre or more is being planted. How can you ever stop it as long as you have this demand?
And I know I'm going to touch one point that also, Gerardo, you're going to like it, that is the environment, the damage the drug is doing to the environment. What we're trying to do right now is, first of all, manual eradication program. Second of all, starting from the outside of these large extensions to the municipalities, because if you see the map of Colombia, the large extension of coca is outside or is not close to any of the cities. The family that is cultivating coca is very close to these municipalities. So what we're doing is fumigating these largest crops, industrial crops, and helping the campesinos, avoiding these crops to go to basically the rainforest. Because sometimes people don't realize the damage that is done by drugs to the environment. And this is something that I know that in the European community, they are really interested in the environment. So I said to them, look, in the last 10, 12 years in Colombia, we have destroyed more than 1 million hectares, 1 million hectares of rainforest. And if you see most of the labs in which cocaine is processed are located on the riversides. So all the precursors, the chemicals, acetone, permanganatum, ether, that are used in the process of the cocaine process, the refining the plant of cocaine, where are they thrown? To the rivers.
Sure.
And those rivers are going to the largest rivers, to the Amazon, to the Orinoco, to the Meta, and to the farms. So some of the things we're saying is, look, we need the help of the Europeans, because I've said it many times. To have cocaine, you need the coca plant. But to make cocaine, you need acetone, ether. And where are all these chemicals coming from? From Europe, basically from Germany and from the Netherlands. If we don't have these products, acetone or permanganatum or ether, it's impossible to produce cocaine. So that's why we need to unite all of us, all our efforts to eradicate this problem.
But isn't it inconceivable, Mr. President, to think that people are actually going to pull out all these coca plants? Every time you pull one out, a peasant on the other property is going to be planting.
No. I think that's something that it's interesting, that we work with the whole community on these programs. And we are developing with them programs in which they could earn good amount of money for them and your families. I bet you, Gerardo, if you go to any of these places in which we have cocaine cultivation, and you ask any Colombian peasant, do you want your children to be involved in this business? I bet you that 100% of them, they will say, we don't want it. When I've been there, in many of these areas, I talked to them, and they said, Mr. President, we don't want to be here. Help us in create alternative development crops. And that's why I think in the case, for example, in the south of Bolivar, in the north part of this country, it's going to be easier to develop alternative programs than in the south part. Because if you see, the south part of Colombia is really jungle. The northern part of Colombia is where 75% of the population is located. But for example, Colombia, we are very, very, very competitive in palm oil. We could cultivate more than 1 million hectares of palm oil. And we have the market in the United States and in other countries. So now we're working with the private sector in enhancing these programs so that we could bring the people that are involved in drugs into a legal business with very good earnings monthly that they would get.
But as long as you have all those noses snorting all that cocaine, you're going to have...
That's right. It's amazing. I don't know, you have the figures, Gerald, but what the figures that I know is that the U.S. is investing like $20 billion a year in drug prevention and education programs. And demand is still there. And I've said it, maybe one of these days Colombia could eradicate the whole coca plantations in this country. But if the U.S. is still demanding the coca, someone is going to give it to the United States. And that's why I think that we need to work together with the police, with the drug prevention programs in the United States. That's the policy of the United States. But I think $20 billion a year is a lot of money to be investing in prevention and education programs And I don't know the results, really, if the figures are coming down or coming up.
It seems that the price of cocaine is dropping on the streets, even though it's being used by lots of people. The supply is being uninterrupted by all of the interdiction efforts.
Even that we have done, I think, this year, if you see these figures this year in Colombia, one thing that is very important, Geraldo, is that we unite all the institution of the Colombian state in fighting this problem. Now you don't have only the police, but the army is involved, the Navy is involved, the Air Force is involved in fighting, for example, drugs, with very good results. We have destroyed, last week we went to the south part of this country, and I think that in one area we destroyed like more than 150 labs of cocaine. In the north part of the country also, in the Putumayo also, we have eradicated 30,000 hectares in the Putumayo. So I think that we've been doing a big job. But also we have one problem, that maybe that's why you could see right now that drug is going more into the United States. Because I think, Geraldo, like 3 months ago, you remember the case of what happened in Lima or in Peru with the airplane of the missionaries.
I remember very well.
The U.S. canceled the whole programs of air interdiction. So now we don't have air interdiction in these countries, and I think that's why maybe many of the cocaine is going to the United States.
So the missionary tragedy, you think, is increasing the supply of drugs?
No, what happened is, yes, what happened was that because of the tragedy, the United States said we have to stop all the programs to see what happened, how can we manage a better program. So we haven't been interdicting in this country for 2 or 3 months. And that was, we were having excellent results. 2 or 3 airplanes a month, we bring them down, we shoot them down, but now we don't have this type of joint operation with the United States. So maybe the supply has been raising in the United States.
Not only in emotional terms.
That's right, for the people of the family, but also on the streets of New York or the streets of the United States.
Has cocaine corroded the soul of Colombia?
Oh yes, many. I think that what happened in this country is that easy money, if he goes to many neighbors in this country, easy money creates such amount of violence and change the culture of this country. Because imagine, even many times the peasants, why they're involved in this business? Because they don't have even to take the product into the market, because people will go even to your own farm to bring it out, And what is amazing is the 1 kilo of cocaine cost in Colombia. The other day in this place I was telling you, cost $1,000 a kilo, and that same kilo in the streets of New York is $30,000. So imagine all the average the intermediary is doing, but it's easy money. So that's why we try to create in this country, change the conscience of the easy money. That many of these people were corrupted by the drug cartels in what we call the sicariato, or the sicarios, that were the people contract to kill people in this country, give them good amount of money, and we still have many problems in many cities of this country with these young people that were involved into the drug business.
Drug trafficking and the whole narco business is a severe, a profound problem. But the fact of the matter, Mr. President, is you've been fighting a bitter, violent civil war here for almost 40 years.
Yes.
Isn't the drug crisis being used as a way to get the United States involved on one side in the Colombian Civil War?
One thing, Geraldo, I think that I want to be clear. We, in my case, I'm going to be president for Colombia for 4 years. My term will finish next year, on August next year. While I'm president of this country, there will never be a military or a foreign intervention in Colombia. Call it the United States or other country. I think the ones that we have to solve the problems are the Colombians, in which we are committed really to solve this problem. What happened is, as you said, that we have to see the history of this country. For the last 40 years, we have an internal conflict. Because people sometimes talk about, when I see the media in the United States and Europe, Colombia, you have a civil war in Colombia. No. A civil war, you will find a country divided. Sometimes even they said, is Colombia going to be the new Vietnam, the Vietnamization of this problem? And that's even not true. We are not even close to Vietnam. If you remember Vietnam, what happened in Vietnam? You have a complete country divided. Ho Chi Minh or the French against, the Vietnamese, a country that was really in a civil war. In Colombia, 99.9% of Colombia, we are fighting that 0.1% that are involved in narco trafficking. And even the insurgent groups, if you see the polls in this country, the popularity of the insurgent groups in this country have never been more than 5%. Now I think it's between 2 to 3%. So this country is not divided in which the ones that are in favor of the insurgent groups and the ones that are in favor of the states. No. We know that we have this internal conflict for the last 40 years. The problem was, or the problem is, that in the last 10 years, the drug money now is involved in this internal conflict, and is the one that is financing these insurgent groups. So now that's why the scene or the scenario changed completely. And that's why we are so committed and asking the international community to be involved in eradicating this common enemy that is narco trafficking, that I want to point it once again, is the one that is financing the insurgent groups in this country.
I agree.
Or all the violence in this country.
Let me read from this rant.
Yeah.
The political and military control that the guerrillas exercise over an ever larger part of Colombia's territory and population is at the heart of their challenge to the Bogota government's authority.
Yeah.
Wasn't yielding Farclandia, actually giving them their own country within a country, a terrible miscalculation?
For example, Gerardo, that's a good question. What part of the country the FARC control? None. What happened is that the FARC is using, you could see that the FARC maybe could attack in a year 60% of the territory, but they don't control the territory. What happened was that the FARC is using the Vietnamese strategy, attacking and running, attacking and running. They're not confronting the army. And since we strengthened the army, you've seen that all these attacks have been coming down. And the problem is that you could have presence of the FARC in 40 or 50% of the territory, but they're not controlling that part of the territory, first of all. Second, what happened with the DMC, the demilitarized zone? What we're talking about is, I think, the demilitarized zone, because many people are saying, okay, the demilitarized zone of Colombia is the size of Switzerland.
Right.
Yeah, but Colombia, I don't know if it's 20 or 30 more times than Switzerland. So for us, the demilitarized zone is 0.005% of the territory. In 30,000 square or 42,000 square, in 42,000 kilometers, I think the population in the DMC is not more than 100,000 people. So you have to be aware, seeing really in the reality what happened in this country. And they are not controlling this area. We have mayors there.
I drove through there, and it was their roadblock.
Oh yes, oh yes. Oh no, they are yes, they are there. But you know that the mayor of San Vicente won over the candidate of the FARC? We had elections there, open elections, and they lose San Vicente won. No, you have to see that what happened is, okay, when we started the process, they said, Mr. President, to start conversation, why don't you give us a space in which we could have conversation? They have to take care of themselves there, and that's why you have the roadblocks there, and you have the presence of the FARC there. One of the things that I agree with Marulanda when I started the process was, you cannot be in the municipalities or the areas. Unfortunately, there's many times there. But one of the things that I want to point out is that, because really something that you have to be aware that they lose the election in San Vicente.
No, I realize that.
You know, they lose the city council. No.
So they can plant the coca, and they can
I think
narco traffickers on a grand.
That's right. That's right. I think the worst thing is, that's why I have proposed to Marulanda. Since I think that in DMC, we don't have, Geraldo, more than 10,000 hectares of coca there. Maybe it has been growing because we are not doing something to growing naturally. I think maybe we could have now, I don't know, 12 or 13,000. That compared with what happened in these countries is a very small part. But on the other hand, that's what I've said to Marulanda. You are saying to the world that you're not involved in narco trafficking. You are telling the international community that you're not a narco guerrilla. So why don't we start the first eradication manual program in the DMC? And that's something that we're promoting with the United Nations. Start eradication in the demilitarized zone. to show the world, that's what you have to show the world. I've said to Marulanda, you have to show the world that you are committed in eradication programs.
They admitted to me, frankly, that they tax
Yes.
the coca trade.
Yes.
They make money, hundreds of millions of dollars
That's
on
right.
the coca trade.
In taxing. And that's why even if you read, Geraldo, the agreement of the Los Pozos of February, this is something that people don't realize very much in Colombia. For the first time, in an agreement with the FARC, they support the manual eradication programs.
They say they do.
Yes, they said it. And that's why they have to show this. And they have to show the world that they're not committed in this. They said, and that's true, they said, Mr. President, and that's something that why many times they're saying to the world, we are not a narco guerrilla, but we live from the narco traffic.
Of course they are.
Yeah.
Washington should rethink.
Geraldo, sorry, we have 1 minute, so let's just change things right now.
Okay.
¿Va bien? ¿Va bien, Geraldo?
Washington should rethink its heavy emphasis on counter-narcotics, accept the fact that the drug problem and the insurgency are intertwined, and help Colombia combat its core problems, the weakness of the armed forces and the state institutions on a stepped-up, sustained basis. Isn't it a fact that what is the problem here is the weakness of the government, as the RAND report points out, and that the narcotics trafficking is an aspect of the weakness, not the other way around?
I think you have to see it two ways. I think that how can I say it? I think that if this democracy was weak and this institution was weak, they were destroyed so many years ago with all the problems that we had for so many years in this country. And I think that it's the strength of the institution of Colombia and the strength of democracy that has allowed us to really confront the worst enemies. I think the worst enemy that you could fight, I think, is these largest narco-trafficking groups, so rich, so wealthy, and I think that we have given so much for the world in this fight on drugs. On the other hand, I think that we need also to strengthen more our institutions, and that's why, for example, our army, the army that we had 3 years ago, this is a complete one, the one that we have right now, to confront not only the insurgent groups, but also narco-trafficking. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 figures very quickly. I had, since my inauguration, I had in August of 1998, 18,000 professional soldiers to fight the insurgents group in this country. There are more or less, if you sum insurgent groups plus vigilantes or autodefensas, around 40,000. Now I have 50,000 professional soldiers. I'm going to leave 50,000 professional soldiers in 4 years, from 18 to 50,000. I have quadruplicated the helicopters, armed helicopters, to fight the insurgent groups on narco-trafficking. We passed from, I think I had 80 helicopters, and at the end of my term we're going to leave like 190 helicopters. So mobility is going to be very important in this country. Colombia is 1,300,000 square kilometers. It's a very, very, very large country. It's very huge. Okay, it's 2 Texas. So I think that now we have a complete different army, and you could see that in the results against narco-trafficking. We create the anti-narcotics battalion, because this is something that many times in the States they don't understand. Is all the U.S. aid, military aid, is not coming into the Colombian army. It's going to special anti-narcotics battalions.
But how do you separate?
That are yes,
really?
one thing. Why? Because what happened, why we create the anti-narcotics battalions? Because before, for example, the police was fumigating, and then they were attacked by the guerrilla. We need to send the army. So we have opened so many fronts. So I said, why don't we create special battalions that are going to go with the police in this area in which we are going to fumigate and attack narco-trafficking and release the rest of the Army of Colombia. I know that sometimes it's very difficult. I said, because they said to me many times, okay, Mr. President, is the military equipment given by the United States going to be used against insurgent groups? I imagine that was going to be your other question. As you said, it's very difficult to divide. I said, the guerrilla, they have been saying for many years that they are not involved in the drug business. So they don't have nothing to be scared about. But if they're there, we have to use their arms against them. If they're taking control of those areas, we have to take also that we're going to use all the effort and all the support of the army against the guerrilla movement. And that's what we've been doing, because on the other hand, Geraldo, we are in a peace process. We have a demilitarized zone. That's the only area of Colombia in which we are not combating the insurgent groups. Outside of the demilitarized zone, we've been combating and having a war with insurgent groups in this country.
Few statistics.
Yeah.
Few statistics. Your army now is the size approximately of the army of El Salvador, but you have 15 times the national territory.
Yes.
The army of El Salvador in its very difficult civil war. They
Yes.
won, but they were 1/15 the size of Colombia.
Yes.
40% of this country, in which the guerrilla groups operate, is an area approximately the size of the entire nation of Vietnam.
That's right.
There were 100 times more helicopters on the United States side in the war against Vietnam, and we lost.
That's
How
true.
can you win this war?
Yeah, I think one of the ways of winning the war is achieving a peace process. And that's why we're involved in a peace process. We've been in this war for 40 years. And I think if you want to win a war, the end of the war is peace. And that's why we're proposing a complete different strategy. Why don't we try to achieve a peace process in which we could end this internal conflict and this violence in Colombia for the last 40 years?
But what happens to that process in a year when you leave office? What happens? You know, you are the father of the peace process. It's been very difficult, very frustrating, progress very slow, but at least you have a peace
That's right.
process. When you are gone, Mr. President, will Colombia continue on the path of trying to work out these differences, these 40-year
I think, Geraldo, two things that are very important. First of all, that we have a peace process. And that's the most important advance in the last 40 years. We are sitting at the table of negotiation with a 12-point agenda. How can we guarantee that this peace process is going forward? The only thing is achieving agreements on the agenda. And that's what we're working with the FARC in this last year. We need to sit on the table of negotiation to make this process irreversible. And something that is very important, Geraldo, that we have been doing for the last 6 months is that we create in Colombia what we call El Frente por la Paz contra la Violencia, the front in favor of peace and against violence, in which all the different political parties are sitting on the table. Because the only thing that we have to avoid is the politicization of the peace process in this country. So we want to create peace as a policy of the Colombian state. It's not of one government or of one person. The peace process of Colombia is not the process of Andrés Pastrana or the process of the government of Andrés Pastrana. It's the process of all Colombians. So that's why we're inviting all the different parties to be sitting on the table, pushing forward the peace process. It doesn't matter who's going to win the next election, the peace process is going to go forward.
Do you believe that in
Yes,
your heart, Mr. President?
if we advance on negotiations on the table, otherwise it's going to be very difficult.
You've had very little advance.
Hold on 1 second, please.
No, I'm not going to hold on. He's only got 5 minutes. You are the best thing that's happened to Colombian-American relations since Simón Bolívar. I said that walking in here. I mean that seriously.
Thank you,
You
Gerald.
are universally regarded as an honest man, and that's so important. You're not, your predecessor in office was tainted with drug money. Despite the enormous temptation of those hundreds of millions, you are untouched by scandal, you personally. But you are one man. You served 1 full-year term. You're almost finished, Mr. President. What happens a year and a half from now? Is it going to return to chaos? Is the Army going to assume a role that's disproportionate with human rights, for example, in the world?
No, that's why, Geraldo, we have to avoid all those things. The only thing that could guarantee that the process going forward is that we could achieve agreements on the table that make the process irreversible.
But what agreements have you achieved? You haven't even gotten these prisoners back.
No, look, but I think, first of all, that we're sitting on the table. That's something that never happened. Secondly, we have an agenda. That's very important. And third, even that the humanitarian agreement that we signed last week, it was out of the table of negotiation. I think it's a very important first step because it's the respect of human rights and international humanitarian law.
But on the
We
one hand,
hope-
FARC gives
yeah.
you the prisoners back. On the other hand, they kidnap other prisoners.
Yeah. But I think that We are going to get about 50 of them, I hope, very soon.
Me too.
And they said that unilateral, they're going to release more than 100. I think that's a first. In 3 years or 2 years of the peace process, the first peace gesture of the FARC to Colombia. We hope to have that. That could be the first step, really, to try to achieve progress in the table of negotiation. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult, because if we don't achieve in the table anything, nobody, not a political party or the Colombians, are going to support the peace process, because people are expecting results. And that's what they're asking the FARC. And there's one thing also, Geraldo, that maybe we're going to advance, that is that we create what we call a personality commission that is going to give recommendations to the table of negotiations on kidnapping, blowing the energy sector and the pipelines, kidnapping, and vigilantes. I think that that's going to be something that could be very important for the peace process, and something that in which we could advance very quickly into the peace process.
Very quickly, because I'm going to run out of time here. Is it true that you're going to yield territory to the ELN, the other leftist guerrilla group in the northern part of the country? And do you think, given the experience with Farclandia, that just won't exacerbate
the situation? It's different, Geraldo, because one thing, for example, if we're going to give some of the territory to the ELN to have conversation and to start a peace process, you have two different peace processes going forward.
So is it true that you are going to yield territory?
That's one of the things that we are planning to do. But here, first of all, the ELN have said that the moment that we start negotiations, they hope that in 9 months we could sign a peace agreement. Secondly, we have verification, international and national verification commissions to control these areas. So we will have international presence in the area that we don't have in the south part of the country. And third, the territory, if we are going to do something with the ELN, is to push forward what they have called the national convention, that it's inviting government, inviting the guerrilla, and inviting the civil society to make this national convention going forward to achieve a peace process in 9 months. But it's not all giving territory. Once again, it's something that the Constitution and the Colombian law allows the president to bring forward a peace process with insurgent groups.
Is it fair to say that the army doesn't agree with this fragmenting of Colombia,
yes.
this balkanization of Colombia?
It's unfair, because if someone has given support to the president and to the peace process, have been the militaries. They're really committed also into the peace process. And I think that they're being very useful in these peace processes. Sometimes, even we have big discussions with them, very useful discussions in trying to achieve a peace process in Colombia. But they have been very supportive of the peace process.
Lost a couple of ministers of defense in the last couple of years.
No, the one, it was a change, but Luis Fernando, the one that just, he has a different, he was...
Running for president?
Now he's saying he's on vacation, but now his party or my party is, they have some special rules to electing the candidates for the next presidents, and that could be one. I don't know what he's planning to do right now.
We are very concerned in the United States, as you know, that American arms and American equipment aren't used to violate people's human rights.
Yes.
We've studied the story of Santo Domingo very closely.
Oh, yes. No.
We've seen some of these other, American helicopters, American cluster bombs being used in a way where civilians are being hurt. How do we ensure against inadvertent American assistance to human rights violations?
Look, Geraldo, because that's one of the policies also of my government. I think that I said I'm really fighting for human rights in this country, not because in position of the United States or the European, because I'm really convinced that we need to work really in the protection of human rights in this country. And that's why I've been asking the insurgent groups, the first agreement should be on human rights and respect of international humanitarian law, and excluding the civil society, the Colombian people out of this conflict. That's something that we've been working very hard, and it's something that we put always first on the table. Secondly, I think that we have done a big job inside the army, because I think that link that many people try to do between paramilitaries and militaries is the worst thing that could happen to the military institution in this country. And that's why we have been working very close with them. For example, in courses in the military academies on respecting on human rights, investing money in creating real conscience inside the armed forces. And now you could see the figures, Geraldo, that are coming really, really down in violation of human rights regarding the armed forces of this country. I think we have worked very hard. Secondly, now the new Minister of Defense is the Vice President of this country, and he was in charge in all the policy managing human rights in this country. So I think right now we could achieve, even that we have achieved many, many things in human rights, I think that we would have achieved many more. And on the other thing, all of these arms, all of these military aid, as I said to you before, Geraldo, on the military of Colombia are concentrated on vetted unities on human rights and corruption, and units that are dedicated to the anti-narcotics war.
Are you doing a good enough job fighting against the paramilitaries, the right wing, these private armies funded by the wealthy classes?
Now I think we're giving results. Remember the Naya? We captured like 60 or more paramilitaries.
That was impressive.
Now the whole Colombian institution is working together, the Attorney's Office, the Fiscalía General.
Isn't that your sort of allies?
Who?
The paramilitaries?
No, for the contrary. My instructions, President of this country, because the how you said in English, the remedy could be worse than the illness. And that's what people don't realize, financing the paramilitaries. So that's why direct instruction of the President is fighting the autodefensa or the paramilitaries, and fight the insurgent groups, fight all these illegal groups that are acting in our country.
I interviewed in Farklandia Raul Reyes.
Yeah.
The day I was interviewing him, we found out when we got back to Bogota, 10 campesinos were decapitated.
Yes, in Cordoba.
How do you negotiate with people who are brutalizing the population?
That's why, Geraldo, I've said to them, look, the first thing we have to do is really exclude the civil population of this conflict. And that's why I was telling you before, we need to work very hard on humanitarian agreements and respect of international humanitarian law. And that's why I think it was very important to sign this first humanitarian agreement with the FARC. To avoid
the mafia left children out of it and families out of it.
Well, in Colombia now is different, but Geraldo, we have to really fight this violence in the country, and that's why I think many times people in the States, they don't understand that the one that is financing all this violence is narco-trafficking. And that's why we want to create the conscience, and we need to create the conscience in the United States that we need to work together to avoid all this type of violence in Colombia.
Right.
How can the FARC, though, believe in that you're committed to human rights, and there hasn't even been a prosecution?
Oh, yeah, okay. Yes.
Of the army.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Two final questions. One personal and one this question. In reading the various human rights reports, it becomes clear that nobody over the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Army has ever been disciplined for a human rights violation. There's been a couple of lieutenant colonels, but mostly it's people in the lower ranks, and it's not clear even how vigorous they have been disciplined, certainly by the judicial process. How can there be any faith that the government of Colombia believes in human rights when there is so little evidence that people who violate human rights are being prosecuted and punished?
Two things, Geraldo. That's not true. If you could see, one of General was and is being judged precisely because one of the massacres that he has been judged for that massacre, and he's out of the army. And we have even something that I'm going to tell you that it's very important that we did in our term as president of this country, that is changing precisely the reform of the military judiciary system. Now, massacres, forced disappearance, torture are not judged by the military, are judged by civilian courts. And that's a big reform we did some months ago, in October of last year. We have sent, like about your order, the figures, I remember like 1,200 cases that were being judged by the militaries now to the civilian courts regarding torture, forced disappearance, and things. Now there are crimes that are judged by the civil courts. I think that was very important first step. And secondly, I think that we're putting all the efforts now uniting all the institutions, not only the militaries, but also the Attorney's Office, the Procuraduría General, the state of Colombia, you know, the presidency, working toward one policy of respecting of human rights in this country. And I think that we have advanced a lot. And one of the most important things I want to point out is the reform of the military justice. Now many of these cases are being judged, are going to be judged by civilian courts.
Will somebody be held responsible for what happened at Santo Domingo?
Yes, I think definitely. And we're putting, because the first one that we want to create, or that we want to know what happened in Santo Domingo, is the Air Force, the militaries, and the government, and the people of Colombia. So we're working very, very hard on really knowing what happened in Santo Domingo. And not only Santo Domingo, because we have so many massacres in this country, really, that we need to point out who are the responsible of this type of violence.
Your own family.
Yeah.
Your personal security. When you leave this office, will you be the target?
You always be in risk here, you know. If you are in favor of the peace, someone is against you. If you are in favor of different alternatives, someone is against you. And definitely, I've been in, you know, I was kidnapped personally. We have felt personally in my family the violence of this country. Not only being myself kidnapped by the drug lords, my father-in-law was killed in a kidnapping, and we found him 2 years after. So we've been living this violence as many families in this country. And unfortunately, we still have problems in this country, but I hope, Gerardo, that by the end of my term, we have solved many of these problems, and that we could say to the world that we've been fighting one of the worst crimes, but definitely I think one of the worst crimes, or the worst crime, is a kidnap. I've said,
still wear the key from the
no.
handcuffs
One day I decided, no, I'm going to leave this out. I used the keys that the police gave me to open my handcuff. But with kidnapping, you lose the 2 or 3 most important things in your life. That is your family and your liberty. And that's why we're working very hard on kidnapping also in Colombia, because still many people have the perception that violence in this country is done by the insurgent groups, but basically 70% of the violence of Colombia is done by common delinquency. And kidnapping is one of these cases in which we're putting a lot of efforts in trying to create conscience in Colombia and put a lot of resources basically in the big cities to control kidnapping. And in these first 6 months, we have dropped very big the figures on kidnapping in the big cities.
But there's a climate of fear here.
Oh, yes.
You lead the
Oh,
kidnapping rate
oh,
in
yeah.
the entire world. How does that make you feel?
Oh, no, very bad, because you know, but I think that we're working with the mayors and we're working with the governors, and I think that we are developing new programs. But definitely, that's one of the things that we want to put more effort and more money.
Will you leave Colombia at the end of your term? Will you come back to the United States, go back to Harvard?
I hope, no, if I could do something like that. After these 4 years, you know, imagine 4 years in Colombia as president, I don't know, maybe it could be 8 years in the United States or in another country at least. No, but definitely.
You don't even have Monica Lewinsky.
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know. Really, Geraldo, I don't know what I'm going to do right now, no? The only thing I know is that 7th of August I'll be one more unemployed of this country. So I need to go and see what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a very young unemployment. So I hope that we could find something to do, work. I will be in politics. I will stay in politics, definitely. If I could do something to help my country, I'll be willing to do that and really committed and do that if the next government want us anything in which we could help basically in the peace process. I hope. The other day I said it in Norway, I hope that we could sign a peace process before the end of my term. But if we don't sign a peace process, I hope also, Gerardo, that we have advanced so much that it's an irreversible process for this country.
I hope so too, Mr. President, but I wonder, will it be the next kidnapping, the next massacre? At what point will even you lose your optimism?
We hope not. We hope that we could give more and more security to our people, more control. We have a different army right now, a different police, and we hope that we really could eradicate violence of Colombia.
You're a good man, and we wish you all the luck.
Thank you very much, Gerardo. Thank you. Thank you very much.